This is a matter of deen. This ilm is a matter of deen. You be careful who you take your deen from.
So this then is the 70 years after the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the 2nd century after Hijrah, there was a new poison which entered into the ummah. And this poison is the poison of ul-Kalaam. Ul-Kalaam is a heritage that came into the Muslim ummah by way of the Jews, the Christians, and the Sabaeans. The Jews, the Christians, and the Sabaeans. And this ul-Kalaam is to speak about Allah and His names and His attributes and His actions on the basis of the language of the philosophy of Aristotle, which is to speak about bodies, al-ajsam, and al-a'rad, and accidents, and to speak about Allah using this terminology. The Jews and the Christians and the Sabaeans had already entered into that before Islam even came. So for example, when you look at some of their most famous scholars amongst the Jews and the Christians, like you have, for example, amongst the Christians you have Augustine of Hippo. And he was a person who, when he wrote, and he was around 200-300 years before Islam came, and when he spoke about Allah, His names and His attributes, he was using the same language that you see found with the Mu'tazila and the Ash'ariyya and the Maturidiyya in their books. Allah is not a body, Allah is not an accident, Allah is not in place, Allah is not confined by time. This language that this individual was speaking with is something he inherited from the Greeks, the philosophy of the Greeks. Likewise the Jews, they also had scholars who were upon the same thing. They were speaking about Allah with the same type of language. And likewise the Sabaeans who were present in the Muslim lands, they had this philosophical way of speaking about Allah and denying His names and His attributes. So when some of the Muslims, when they interacted with these people in Damascus, in Harran, and in other places, they became poisoned by this Kalam. And this Kalam entered into the Ummah in the 1st century or the 2nd century after Hijrah. And this is when we saw certain slogans being made. Allah is not above His throne. Allah will not be seen in the hereafter. Allah does not have names and attributes. Allah does not speak. The Quran is something created. All of these doctrines came about by way of the poison of this Kalam. And so then we saw the various sects of Kalam, the Jahmiyyah, and the Mu'tazila, and the Kullabiyya, and the Ash'ariyya, and the Maturidiyya. Over the next 2 centuries, all of these sects then began to emerge, and all of them were founded upon this ilmul Kalam, which was a foreign influence. The Sahaba never knew this Kalam, and the Messenger never brought this Kalam. And the Imams, like Imam Malik, and Imam al-Shafi'i, when we read into their works, we see that they made a severe condemnation of this Kalam when it appeared in their time, when they saw that people were speaking about Allah, His names, His attributes, on the basis of this speech, this language. Bodies, al-ajsam, wal-a'rad, wal-jawahir, and so on and so forth. All of this is something that was foreign to Islam. So now we have the poison of ilmul Kalam, which entered the Muslims, and in the very belief regarding Allah, they became divided. So some of them said that Tawheed is to deny all of Allah's names and attributes. And some of them said Tawheed is to affirm Allah's names but to deny His attributes. And some of them said Tawheed is to affirm some of the attributes but deny others. And so this splitting and differing occurred in the very foundation of Iman itself, which was never present amongst the Sahaba. So this is another factor that led to the splitting and deviation. And then we had in the 4th century, the Batiniyya. The Batiniyya were a people who concealed disbelief, and then they showed the face of Shiism. Right? So outwardly they showed the face of Shiism. So they came to the Muslims, and inwardly they were upon a philosophical type. They basically inherited the beliefs of the Greeks and their philosophy and so on and so forth. And so what they wanted to do was to merge the Sharia with what they called al-Hikmah. Al-Hikmah, by that they mean the philosophy of the Greeks. So they came in the 4th century and they began to spread this poison amongst the Muslims. and they wrote 51 tracts, 51 small treaties, and they spread them amongst the Muslims in complete secrecy. And they were known as al-Ikhwan as-Safa, or Ikhwan as-Safa, the brethren of purity, as they claimed. So they spread this amongst the Muslims, and they introduced a philosophical type of spiritualism. And what they meant by this was that a person can acquire higher types of knowledge and illumination, which is other than what is in the Sharia. And they can do this by spiritual, philosophical means. And they enter this into the Muslim Ummah. And this was the foundation of what came later of this spiritual Gnostic Illuminism that we find in the books of Al-Razi and Al-Ghazali and other than them, when they merge this philosophy with the spiritual type of, the philosophy and spiritualism, and they enter this into the Ummah. So there are many other things. The point here is that many factors came to the Muslims that caused them to be split and to be disunited and to separate in terms of what their hearts contained and what their tongues expressed. Okay? So now this led to the splitting and the weakening. To explain to you the degree of this splitting and weakening, if we take the most basic statement that a Muslim makes when he says, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, we see now that if you were to ask different Muslims, they will explain to this the meaning of this kalima in a different way. So to some people, when you say La ilaha illallah, what is this tawheed? What does it represent to them? It is that to deny Allah has names, to deny Allah has attributes, to deny Allah has actions, and to believe in an abstract notion of unity in the mind, that this is what is tawheed. This is the tawheed of the people of Kalam, of the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila. So this is how some people now see the meaning of La ilaha illallah. This is not what the companions were upon. And if you ask another group of people the meaning of La ilaha illallah, they will say that its meaning is that this whole creation and Allah is a single entity. There's nothing in existence except Allah. To deny that there is the creator and the created is polytheism. This is their twisted understanding of La ilaha illallah. And these are the people who are upon wahdatul wujud, the unity of existence. Those who fell into that Gnostic spiritualism, as I mentioned, they were led into this belief that everything in existence is Allah and that this is tawheed. And then there are other people who claim that there is no doer of the actions except Allah alone. Because they thought that if we affirm for the human that he has a will and that he can act of his own accord, meaning that he has free will to choose and act, that this somehow now is tantamount to shirk. So they said that every action that takes place, its doer is in reality is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which means that every speech made by anyone in the creation, its doer is its speaker is Allah. Any action made by any person, its doer is in fact Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they said that this is the true meaning of tawheed. And so we see that all of these, the fact that Muslims are divided on the very basic kalima of tawheed, this shows to you the great misguidance that we have fell into, unfortunately, on account of the shubuhat. Shubuhat meaning the doubts and misconceptions in knowledge-based matters. So this now leads us to the second angle, which is the shahawat. The shahawat. The shahawat meaning that when the Muslims disobey Allah, that in their obedience, that they disobey Allah and they fall into certain things on account of which they are punished and they are caused to suffer calamities and weakness and so on and so forth. So now let's look in the Sunnah. We said earlier, if you remember, we said that there are al-asbab al-kawniyya and al-asbab al-shar'iyya. We said there are certain things that we, from our minds, we cannot fathom and know these things. Right? And from these things, what I mentioned in the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This hadith is reported by Abdullah bin Umar. And so he said, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he turned to us one day. And this hadith is authentic, reported by Ibn Majah and At-Tabarani and Ibn Abdul Barr. from Abdullah bin Umar. And so he said that the messenger turned to us and he said, O gathering of the Muhajireen, there are five things that you will be put to trial with. You will be tested by these five things. I seek refuge in Allah that you should reach them, meaning you, the companions, should reach these five things. So he said, never does al-fahisha, meaning when people follow their lusts and their desires and they commit illicit things, that never does this appear in a people and they make it open and make it public, except that plagues and diseases will come to them which their predecessors had never ever experienced before. So now we have here a sabab shar'i, that here Allah has explained a cause and an effect. A cause and an effect. And the cause is that if you fall into shameful, lustful deeds, meaning you commit fornication and you commit adultery, and you make this open so that it is open in the society and no one shows any objection towards it, then when this happens, the effect of that will be that there will be diseases and plagues that had never occurred before amongst their predecessors. So this is cause and effect. Then he said, and never do the people cheat in the weights and the measures, in the mizan. Never do they fall short in the mizan. What does this mean? This means that if someone buys from you 10 pounds of potatoes, you give him 8 and you put 2 pounds of mud in there. This is cheating in the weights and measures. Never do the Muslims fall into this, cheat in the weights and measures, except that they will be taken by years of famine and shortage of food and the tyranny of the ruler, the oppression of the ruler. So this is another cause and effect. The cause is you cheat in the weights and measures, you cheat the Muslims, and then Allah will punish all of the people by way of famines and the lack of food and the tyranny of the ruler, the oppression of the ruler. And then he said, and never do they withhold the zakat. Never do they withhold the zakat. If they withhold the zakat from giving the zakat, then Allah will withhold the water from the sky. The water will be held from the sky, and had it not been for the beasts and animals, Allah would never ever have made it to rain. So this shows that the cause is that if you cheat in giving the zakah, you don't give the zakah, then Allah will withhold the rain, and therefore there will be droughts. There will be droughts. And if it hadn't been for the animals, Allah would never have made it to rain, except that out of mercy, Allah made it rain for the beasts and animals. So we see cause and effect. And then he said, and never ever do they break the ahdullah, the covenant that they had with Allah. What is this covenant? The covenant that they had with Allah and His Messenger. It means to worship Allah alone and to make ittiba, to follow the Messenger ﷺ in his sunnah. This is the covenant. So never do they break and fall short in this covenant, except illa sallallahu alayhim aduwan min ghayrihim fa'akhadhu ba'da ma kana fi aydihim. So never do they fall short in this covenant, except that Allah, He empowers His enemies over, He empowers their enemies over them. So their enemies are now given mastery and control over them. And so then they begin to take that from which they used to possess. That which the Muslims used to possess. So, this is cause and effect. If the Muslims break the covenant with Allah, then Allah will allow the enemies to overempower them and to gain mastery over them and to steal their resources and to steal their riches from them. If you want to understand colonialism, there is your answer right here in the statement of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam.